In week 2 of this course, we're going to be covering a bunch of software that you're going to install that will constitute the data scientist toolbox as we describe it for this course track. So the first question you might ask yourself is, what software do you need? Well, to know what software you need, you have to know what exactly a data scientist is going to do. So in this course sequence, we're going to talk about all the different components of being a data scientist. So we're going to start with defining a question of interest, and then identifying the ideal data set to try to answer that question, determining if that data is even accessible. A lot of the times, the ideal data set isn't even available. Then ways that you can go out and actually obtain the data, whether it's from a database or from a website, cleaning the data up so that it can be processed and analyzed, performing some sort of exploratory analysis, including making plots and clustering so that you can identify patterns that you didn't know about beforehand in the data set, performing statistical prediction or modeling to try to build sort of an intuition about what's going to happen in the next sample you might take, interpreting your results and challenging them, then synthesizing them and writing them up in reproducible ways that can be shared with other people. Finally, we're going to talk about distributing results through things like interactive graphics, also through write-ups and presentations, and finally through interactive apps built on top of R. So the main workhorse of data science in terms of this data science track is the R programming language. There are other alternative languages that are also really great for data science, but we're going to be focusing on R since it's one of the most widely used languages, and it's widely supported by a large group of developers who can contribute new packages all the time that can improve and extend the functionality of R. We'll be installing this in the second week of the class. We'll do most of our coding in RStudio. RStudio is an integrated development environment, an IDE for R. It's actually one of the best IDEs, I think, for many other languages as well in terms of data science. The IDE is free as well, just like the language R. And so we'll be downloading this IDE and setting it up again in the second week of the class. The interface looks something like this, and we'll talk a lot more about this in the second week and later on in the rest of the class. But you can see here in the top left-hand corner, I've got a file. So this is a new .r file that's going to contain some code that we're going to be writing in. So we can write that code here in the file at the prompt. And then down here you see a console. So we'll be entering sort of commands at the command line down here in this console. And then over here you can see other information you might be interested in looking at, say plots you recently made, the packages that you have loaded, or help files for specific functions that you might be interested in. There are a lot of other really nice functions that come with RStudio, and we'll be talking about those more as we move throughout the class. The primary type of file that we'll be interacting with for the most part in this class is an R script. So an R script is a file with the extension .r, and so it's just actually a text file, except the text file contains bits of R code. So here you can see a comment. So this isn't actually executed, but you can include that so that people can understand what's happening in the code. And then there are things like functions and so forth, which we'll be talking about a lot more when we're coding. If this seems intimidating to look at this function right now, you shouldn't worry about it. When you get through R programming, you'll be a wizard and be able to do things much more complicated than this. The other thing that we'll be using is R Markdown documents. So reproducible research involves creating documents that can be reproduced. In other words, they can be rerun and produce the exact same numbers that you got when you did your analysis. And the primary vehicle for doing that is through Markdown and R Markdown. So this is a file with an extension .rmd. And this .rmd file has a very structured format of text file. And so we'll talk a lot more about what that format is later. But you can take this structured file and you can knit it to HTML with this button here, and you actually create an HTML file that will actually be formatted very nicely. So for example, what you type in text looks like this, and it turns into a nice bulleted list in the HTML once you knit to HTML. And we'll talk a lot more about how that file works later in the class. We're going to talk about how we are going to do distributed version control with GitHub and Git. So part of this class will be setting up your GitHub account and creating a portfolio of all the different things that you do throughout the course track that then you can share with employers, or you can share and contribute to other projects so that you can get your name out there in the data science community. We're going to be running most of the commands from the shell or from the command line interface. So this is a command line interface. It doesn't look like much right here. You can see that there's a prompt up here in the top left, and we're going to be entering commands as text prompts, and those commands will then execute a lot of the programs that we're going to be talking about. So this is a brief tour of all the tools that we're going to be using in this class.